Today, Love Notions is featuring the Willow Wrap Dress, and we're also talking about 10 tips for sewing beginners. The Willow Wrap Dress holds a really special place in my heart because it was literally the very first dress I ever sewed. So if you're looking for something fun and approachable for a beginner, I highly suggest trying the Willow Wrap Dress. Later on in this video, I'll have some information on the pattern, but first let's talk about those tips for newbies. My first tip for a sewing beginner is to have fun in the process and don't just live for the final product.
Sewing can be so satisfying, especially when you complete a super challenging make where you had to learn a lot. But take some time to actually enjoy the learning and the experimentation and construction as well. It doesn't have to be all about the end product, because when you mess something up, and you will mess something up, you might feel like it was all worthless. But learning can be rewarding too.
My next tip for a sewing newbie is to find your community.
It is so helpful to have a community of people to get inspired by, to ask questions, and to show your makes. This community can be a sewing club in person, your sewing friends online, your Instagram or YouTube account, or a Facebook group. When I first started, I was constantly asking quick questions on the Love Notions Pattern Support group. I have made so many real friends in there, and keeping in touch with them is a part of my sewing process. It keeps me feeling connected to others and gives me a place to get support in the moment.
My third sewing tip for a newbie is to know there's no sewing police. So if you want to do something your way or deviate slightly from a tutorial, it'll be okay.
If this is your hobby, make what you want how you want it. Add a waist tie, raise the neckline, add a pocket, try a different seam finish. You do you and try new things. You should understand that not following the directions is a bit of a risk, as designers and professionals are thoughtful and have reasons for the way they create a design or sewing instruction, but it's also fun to try new things and learn in the process.
My fourth tip for a sewing newbie is to know that it doesn't have to be perfect.
It's okay if your idea or attempt at something doesn't quite turn out the way you envisioned. Chances are nobody else will notice that neckline pucker, or that you snip too far into the seam, or that your hem isn't even. Most probably won't even notice if you attach the neckband on backwards or your iron melts the fabric. Wear it with pride and enjoy the completed but not perfect garment. Take it as a learning experience and move on to the next thing.
Next, sewing newbies should know what a muslin is and when to make one.
So what is a muslin? When it comes to garments, sewists of all levels often make a practice piece before they cut into their final fabric. On this trial run garment, or a muslin, they try out the techniques the pattern calls for and check the fit of the pattern against their body. Since every body is different, it's important to try a garment out using a low-risk fabric instead of jumping in with expensive or irreplaceable fabric. Then you can adjust the pattern pieces for your unique fit and get familiar with the sewing process. This practice piece should be the same type of fabric that you want to use for your final version. You cannot sew a woven muslin for a knit pattern. The muslin fabric is just maybe a lower quality or something you aren't attached to in case it doesn't turn out as you thought it would. Then, when you make your final piece, you take everything you learned from your muslin and apply it to your final. Shorten, lengthen, blend sizes, etc. It's not necessary to make a muslin, but I would do one for special occasion garments or when you have a special, expensive, or irreplaceable final fabric.
My next piece of sewing advice for a newbie is to go at your own pace.
It can be tempting, but don't compare your progress to others. Everyone learns and sews and works at a different pace in a different situation. I have heard it said that comparison is the thief of joy, so try to make your experience fit your life and your process. It's okay to finish one project a month or one project a year. Be in tune with what works for you and enjoy your time with your hobby when you can. And don't compare your progress in terms of skills or productiveness to others.
If you're a sewing newbie, I highly suggest that you read the tutorial, especially the parts at the beginning.
Or at the very least, get familiar with it before you start. Often the steps won't make sense until you read a couple directions ahead anyway. Look carefully at the illustrations and be sure to notice which is the wrong side of the fabric and which is the right side of the fabric. Also, there is a ton of valuable information in the tutorial, particularly in the beginning for cutting and printing and picking your options. It even has directions for customizing your fit. Read through that area and watch the linked videos to help you start on the right track. And if you need a refresher on how to assemble and print patterns correctly, I'll link those videos here and in the description box as well.
If sewing is your hobby, don't accept orders or make it your business.
Once people know you can sew, get ready for people to ask you to sew all sorts of things, even things you have no idea how to sew. I think sometimes people think sewing is a cheaper alternative to store-bought, but in most cases, this could not be further from the truth. Sewing is time intensive. It also takes a lot of expensive resources like machines and fabric and notions. I highly suggest not taking orders unless you are ready with a price or timeline that makes sense for you. I only sew as gifts because I know that most wouldn't understand the true dollar value of a sewn item.
If you are new to sewing garments, I recommend starting with knit fabrics.
This might be the opposite advice from what you've heard before, but I really stand by this. When it comes to sewing clothes, woven fabrics don't have stretch and are way less forgiving than knits. When I first started sewing, knits were awesome because even if I messed up the seam allowance or got a sewing step completely wrong, the item would still fit my body and was wearable and help me keep my excitement about sewing. On the other hand, woven garments tend to have slightly trickier steps like darts or closures, and most of the time there is very little fitting forgiveness in a woven garment. Basically, wovens can be easier to put through your machine, but when it comes to creating a wearable garment, try knits. And I'd stick to knits that are a little thicker, like Liverpool or Ponte or even double brush poly, and avoid slinky knits like rayon spandex or ITY.
And lastly, if you're a sewing newbie, be sure to look carefully at your pattern pieces and read all those directions.
Before you cut, learn your pattern pieces and take notice of all the markings. Grain line is hugely important when you sew, and it's really helpful to carefully look at all the little triangles and T's, and especially the instructions on the pieces themselves. Watch out for fold lines and when something is supposed to be mirrored or cut 4 times instead of 2.
So now let's talk about Willow Wrap Dress, which is a project that's perfect for a beginner to sewing. The Willow Wrap Dress is a knit pattern, which means that it's going to have a lot more forgiveness when it comes to fitting. It also has no closures, no buttons, no darts, and it's a very straightforward sew. The Willow Wrap Dress highlights every figure beautifully, and it also has nursing and maternity options. If you're looking for something super simple to start with, I recommend using the plain bodice and not the pleated bodice. After you get that down, try adding on the flounce or the pleated bodice and all of the other options that the pattern comes with. If you want more Willow Wrap Dress help, support, or inspiration, check the Love Notions blog by searching Willow in the search bar. I'd also suggest joining the Love Notions Facebook pattern support group, and there you can search Willow and find tons and tons of inspiration. It's also a great place to ask for help. If you're a sewing newbie, be sure to drop any questions that you have in the box below, and we will get back to you. And if you're a more experienced sewist, let us know what are some tips that you would give to any new sewer.
Little dance, take my hand, darling, take a chance. You be my queen, I'll be your king. Show you everything that you've been missing, shorty. Come on, dance a little dance. Got me in a trance and just one glance. So don't wait no more. I'm me, I'm more. I'm the one you're looking for, sure.